Welcome to Story Sirens.
I'm Yenny.
And I'm Sarah.
Here at Story Sirens, we do deep dives into our favorite myths, legends, and fairy tales that are often found in our favorite books, movies, and more.
Exactly. And speaking of favorite books, Yenny, have you read this book called A Court of Thorns and Roses?
Yes.
Why am I not even surprised? Have you read, the first book or the whole series?
I've honestly, I'm actually on my second time reading the series, and I've never done this before. And it's just, I'm so obsessed with the Bat Boys that
it's hard not to be.
Oh my God.
They are dreamy. They are dreamy. And I have my whole rant I want to go on about them. It's a good rant, but we'll save that for another episode. But
we will.
Anyway, I'm glad you've read them because obviously I have too. And you're talking about the Bat Boys, but I kind of want to circle in on another character. You know Tamlin? So let me go ahead and on our very first episode, alienate a huge portion of our listeners. I'm a Tamlin fan. I love him. Not for Farah. Not for Farah. Don't get me wrong. But I do love him. I think he's a great example of an actual complex character.
And I promise you, she will explain the reasoning because we're best friends. And honestly, if she did not explain this, I would have okay, you know what? Fine. I kind of agree. He is complex. Whatever.
He is a complex character. Thank you.
Ugh.
But I'm also biased towards him because I loved him before the books. So, yes, the character of Tamlin, or Tam-Lin, actually existed way before Sarah J. Maas published ACOTAR in 2015.
But here's the real question. Was he also a sexy blonde fae in the past?
I don't know about blonde, but he was sexy and he was fae.
You know what? I'll take it.
Perfect. So, Tamlin is actually a character from Celtic folklore. He's also known by the name Tamlin, Tomline, Tamblin, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, and Thomas.
Okay, I have to stop and say, for some reason, this continuously made me giggle because he has such cool things like Tamlin, Tomline, and then there was this guy named Thomas.
Hey, you know what? I have a soft spot for the name Thomas, but I do understand, among all of these names, that one does sound a little strange.
Off.
Yeah, there's a theme here, and then, oh, hey, here's another T name.
This is Peter.
But yeah, Tamlin's story is one of Scotland's most famous fairy tales, and it shows up in print as early as the 1500s.
That's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So, we all got really excited about it in 2015, and people were all excited about it in, the 1550s. So imagine that. The story was again popularized in the 19th century by Francis James Child in his song collection, The Child Ballads. The story of Tamlin was always sort of set to music, and so he set it to, sort of a new song cycle to modernize it.
I will say, and I'm just going to interject real quick, I don't understand how this is a child story. This is the fact that this is a child ballad to me, and once you guys will listen to the story that Sarah says, I wonder if you're going to think the same thing. I'm where is this a kid's story? Where?
Oh, for sure. And that's a common misconception because it isn't a kid's story. It's named The Child Ballads because of Francis James Child. It's named after the guy who popularized the ballad.
I'm stupid.
No, you're not. I thought the same thing too when I very first discovered Tamlin's story. No, you're good. I'm glad we can clarify that right now. Wow, so the story itself is very Beauty and the Beast-esque. It's full of classic European fairy tale motifs like rescuing someone from fairies, proving true love, and running the risk of losing life and body parts. So, let's dive into it.
I'm ready. Let's deep dive into this not blonde, hot, fae, not child story man. But a guy named Francis Child did it, so that's why it's called Child.
There you go.
There you go.
I'm learning. You got
it.
Okay, so the story follows Janet. In some stories, she's called Margaret or May Margaret, but in this version, we're going to call her Janet. And she's the daughter of a Scottish earl. She is told never to go into Carterhaugh, which are these woods. It's this forest that are part of that are part of her father's lands. But since Carterhaugh Woods are part of her father...
What is up with you? Carterhaugh, Father Hall. That is pretty bad.
I know. But hey, we're just going to keep going.
Yeah.
So, since Carterhaugh Woods are part of her father's lands, she's the heir to it. So she doesn't really understand why she's told never to go into them. But there are legends of people being stolen by the fairies in the woods, of a fairy knight who guards the woods for the fairy queen, and of young women being attacked or stolen in the woods. Ooh. Janet craves adventure, like Belle, and is tired of playing dumb games with the court ladies.
I too tired of the dumb games. Forget the petticoats and, these walks along the lake. Let me get ravished by a young fae who's,
Exactly. This story is just for you.
Yeah, this is not going to result into anything bad at all, definitely.
No, not at all. But yeah, she's tired of being yet another lady in her father's court and doing tedious hobbies like embroidery work. And most of all, she doesn't like being told what to do.
I'm pretty sure this girl was Hispanic. I'm constantly.
There you go.
You know what? I don't like being told what to do too.
Exactly.
I'm going to say she's a Scottish Cuban.
I love it. So, her father's like, never go into Carterhaugh Woods. And she's like, hey, this is part of our land. So basically, I can do what I want. So one day, she sneaks out of her room, past the edges of her father's estate, and goes to wander the woods. Once there, she watches the animals and enjoys the beauty of the woods and of nature. And finally, she picks a wild rose. Sound familiar?
Oh, no.
And that is when Tamlin, the fairy knight, approaches her saying,
Sarah, can I say I want to be a manly man?
Yeah, be a manly man. Be this sexy fae knight.
Yes. All right, ready? Here it goes. By what right do you take a rose from these woods? These woods do not belong to you.
Swoon!
Oh my God! What a sexy man I am.
You're a very sexy man. This is raising up a whole new set of questions for our friendship. So, after Tamlin says this to her, Janet says it's just as much her right to be there as it is his.
Tell him.
In some tellings of the story, she's frightened by him, but the most common similarity between versions is her defiance of him.
Nice.
So, apparently, their first ever conversation leads to love at first sight. Because almost immediately after this encounter, we find out that Janet is expecting Tamlin's child.
Excuse me? What? Okay. Come on, Janet. Okay, at the first sight, a little bit, you do you, Janet. But you know what? Again, hot fae guy. You know what? I'd probably allow it.
There's a little magic, and with that sexy voice of his, she's wanting big adventures, Yenny.
She's
big adventures.
She's gonna see how big that wingspan really.
Girl.
I don't know. I mean, I too. If I just have to pick a rose and then get some, man, I'm gonna have a garden, y'all. Alex is gonna be tired all the time. I don't care.
We're gonna circle back to that later. Okay.
Yeah, we'll circle back.
But yeah, so she and Tamlin are expecting a baby. And there are some variations between the different versions of the story of whether or not their encounter was consensual. In some versions, it is implied that headstrong Janet was, quote unquote, humbled, while others implied there is a romantic spark between the two. And then the story fades to black with lines like, "And what they did I cannot say, the leaves they were between." And as
all right,
the story...
but hold up. Wait, Sarah, hold on. The leaves were in between. I just, use a blanket. Don't just do it on the floor. You know what I mean?
I'm just going to assume, like, these are very soft, silky, magic fairy leaves.
Yeah, I guess.
It's like...
These are the leaves.
Like 1,000 thread count leaves.
You imagine, like, oh, darling, you brought out the silky leaf.
Oh, my goodness. But yeah, and so for this telling, we are going to lean towards the version of the story where it was consensual, where there was romance. Plus, with how the rest of the story progresses, romance to me makes more sense. But
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So anyway, after their first encounter, she's back at her father's court. And as time passes, people notice, there's a bun in the oven. And so there are snickers among the court ladies at Janet's fallen state. And her father demands that she identify the baby's father because he's thinking it's one of the men of his court.
I'm sorry, this is really Jerry Springer. Tell me, who is the baby's father? Tell me right now. Well, I'm giving them an English accent, but they're Scottish. But my Scottish is, laughable. Sarah, can you do a Scottish accent?
Oh, no. Scottish is very tricky for me, but I am working on it. But yeah, so her father's thinking okay, so obviously she got it on with a gentleman of my court, and so he wants to arrange for her and the mystery man to be married. She's his heir. Her marriage is supposed to be a strategic political affair, but now that she is with child, her father is worried about her reputation and about her future. But, Scotland at this time did have laws stating that a child born out of wedlock could be legitimate if the parents were planning on being married. So that was her father's thinking. And this point is important for later in the story.
You know what? Real quick, yay for Scotland in that time frame for being a little bit more progressive. Because I know in other places of the world, the moment that you got pregnant out of wedlock, that was it for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Might as well turn into a crone at that point because that's it.
Yes. Everything, your life was over. But yeah, at this time period in Scotland, if, you were expecting a baby, basically it could be made to be legitimate if it was oh, no, the dad and I are going to get married. Let's just go ahead and get the ball rolling on this.
Yeah.
But because of this law is important later on in the story. So, her father's asking her who the father of the baby is. The ladies of the court are laughing at her fallen state. All of the men of the court are nervous because they don't know what she's going to say. But Janet is absolutely unbothered. She's confident. She's not ashamed. And Janet basically says, I wouldn't give any of your noblemen the time of day.
Ooh,
this
baby.
is all my doing.
Yes, ma'am.
And in other versions, she admits that the baby's father is an elf, but she declares that she will not forsake him. She will not be forced into a marriage that she does not consent to.
You tell him, baby girl. You freaking tell him.
So after this conversation, she returns to the Forbidden Woods. She goes back to Carter Hall, possibly to look for poisonous plants that would end her pregnancy.
Oh.
Some stories claim that this is her idea. Others say she is urged to do this by family members. Tamlin comes to her again and asks her, Tamlin comes to her again and asks her, why is she trying to kill their baby? Again, some versions of the story say that Janet was not ever trying to harm the baby. She knew that plucking any flower would summon Tamlin, and she needed his help. She wanted their child to be legitimate.
Can you imagine? Wait. Before there was texting and DMing, all you had to do was pluck a flower and a hot elf would just come to you. I mean, honestly, like I said before, I'd make a baby pretty. On the first night, I'd make a baby. That is super romantic, Sarah. Forget DMing me. Nothing about Netflix and chill. Let's pluck a flower and go on the 1,000 count leaves on the floor.
Our dream fairy date. It's perfect.
Dream fairy date.
I love it. In a beautiful nature, because, since this is a fairy forest, I'm going to assume, there aren't mosquitoes that are bothering you. There are no cockroaches.
No.
It's all beautiful and just,
Even
enticing.
the cockroaches are beautiful.
They are beautiful and they are necessary to our ecosystem. I don't want them in the house.
Negative. Goodbye.
So, Janet plucks a flower. Tamlin is summoned. And Janet, as bold as ever, this woman, has no fear, says that she wouldn't hurt the baby if the father was a human who could give the baby his name.
So what, she wants it to be a junior? She wants it to be junior. Tamlin Jr. As long as it's a junior, that's all I care about.
Exactly. But because the baby comes from the union of a mortal and a fairy, no good could come of it being born. And this is when Tamlin lets her know he was once a mortal man.
So he lied at first. He was withholding information. I don't know about that.
Listen, they had some serious chemistry. It was, do things now, talk later.
Fair.
But yeah, Tamlin was once a mortal man, and he was stolen away by the Fairy Queen years ago when he fell off of his horse in the woods. And what's more, we're adding more layers to this story.
I know, right? This keeps going.
Right? Now that he is basically a hostage of the fairies and has been turned into a fairy, every 7 years on Halloween, which sounds a little out of the blue in this story, but often in Celtic celebrations, it's a New Year celebration. But every 7 years on Halloween night, the Fairy Queen offers a sacrifice to hell. And Tamlin is scared that he's been chosen as the sacrifice for this year.
Oh my God.
So, if Janet can help him escape the fairies, he will turn into a mortal man again, and they can all live together happily ever after as a family.
Okay, hold up. So this just brings me to something. I think this is what was the loosely used in ACOTAR, because if we remember correctly, Tamlin has to have a mortal fall in love with him. And then he has 7 times 7 years to do it. So that's where we bring in the 7 years on Halloween. That's kind of the same thing. And then Amarantha, which could be thought of as the fairy queen, if you will, at that point, was obsessed with Tamlin in the book too. So I kind of see what Sarah J. Maas was doing there. She was kind of using little tidbits of Tamlin's story to then create A Court of Thorn and Roses.
Exactly.
I feel like it's more... A lot of people are like, oh, it's very Beauty and the Beast theme. I think it's a mixture of Beauty and the Beast and Tamlin, but more towards the Tamlin side.
Oh, I think you're spot on. I think you are spot on.
Yeah.
So, what Janet has to do is return to the woods at midnight on Hollywood. So, basically, to save Tamlin, what Janet has to do is return to the woods at midnight on Halloween as the fairy knights ride through the woods. She will see Tamlin on a white horse. Janet then has to pull Tamlin from his horse and catch him the way the fairies caught him initially. Now, here's the tricky part. Tamlin tells Janet she will have to hold on to him with all her might because the Fairy Queen will not want to let him go. The Fairy Queen will use her magic to turn him into all sorts of terrifying animals in an attempt to make Janet let go of him. But Tamlin promises that Janet will not be harmed. And if she keeps a hold of him and proves she is not afraid of the Fairy Queen's magic, the spell keeping Tamlin trapped in the woods will be broken. And Janet is able to do exactly as Tamlin instructs. And as somebody who struggles to follow instructions, I'm so proud of her.
Honestly, she's a badass, because if Alex would turn into a cockroach, I'd totally fling him out. I would be like, oh, forget it. Bye. Love you.
Oh, yeah.
Come back to me when you turn into a hot, sexy fae again. Okay, we'll try again later on. In the next 7 years.
In the next 7 years, yes. If you manage not to be sacrificed to hell.
I feel like Alex and Jared would make it work. You know, they wouldn't be sacrificed.
Oh, no.
They'd find themselves useful at something else.
Yes. Jared would be persuasive.
Yeah, I was going to be like, Jared's going to take care of all the security footage and all the cameras. Alex will be the Kung Fu knight.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. Really start some legends in the hills of Scotland. So, at midnight on Halloween, as the fairies ride past her, Janet grabs hold of Tamlin and pulls him off of his horse. The fairy queen sees this and turns him into various animals and objects, including a snake, a bear, a wolf, a lion, a burning coal, and at last, he turns back into a mortal man because Janet never let go of him through all of those transformations. Janet then wraps him in her cloak to hide him from the sight of the fairies. The fairy queen rages at not being able to find him and states that she wishes she had taken out his eyes, or better yet, his heart, so that he could not be taken away from her by a mortal woman. In some versions of the story, she states that she would have replaced his eyes with wood and his heart with stone.
She seems like such a nice lady. I feel like we could have coffee with her and be like, talk about men. But also, his heart with stone, if we remember, for all you ACOTAR fans, that was something that Amarantha gave to Tamlin. She made his heart of stone.
Exactly.
She made his heart be stone. And then, with this whole taking out his eyes or keeping a piece of him, Jurian, also from ACOTAR, Amarantha did that to him.
Yes.
So, again, she's using pieces of this to create this whole new story. And it's so cool. It's so cool to see where she got this from to make such a crazy series that everybody likes. But also, I would like to have her for a cup of coffee. Like, just to ask her, maybe we could do a podcast with this fairy queen. Be like, tell us, who hurt you?
Who hurt you?
Who hurt you?
Like, what happened? But yeah, so basically the fairy queen rages on, and then she yields, and she leads her procession of her fairy court and her fairy knights on, and when all of the magical creatures have ridden past them and given up looking for Tamlin, Janet takes him home to her father's castle, and they live happily ever after. So yeah, this story has been so popular for a very long time, and one of the reasons it's lasted for centuries is the fact that it focuses on the bravery of the heroine rescuing her love. Janet is not the damsel in distress, Tamlin is.
And that's so refreshing, and I think that it was so progressive for its time, you know what I mean? Like, you didn't see that a lot.
Exactly.
Most of the times, the girls are the ones who got the short end of the stick. Yeah, I gotta stay. Sleeping Beauty is asleep for, like, the whole movie. You know what I mean? Like, it's just... It's so refreshing, and it's so strange to see that. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons why this story is so revered and so loved. It's because it's one of the only times that we get to see the damsel, not, like you said, not in distress.
Yes. And, and we don't have to sacrifice the love story or anything like that for that. Like, she gets to be a brave, bold heroine while still getting the man in the end, at least for these interpretations.
And there's no shame, you know what I mean? Like, she gets pregnant, she loses her virginity. And I feel like back in the day, a lot of these stories would revolve around the virgin woman.
Yes.
Her virginity, dressed in white. And Janet's like, yeah, bruh, I got piped in silk leaves and I had the baby. And yeah, here we are,
exactly.
rescuing my husband.
Well, and there's a lot of imagery in the story that I want to talk about real quick. I love the fact that you mentioned, Janet as the virgin dressed in white. In a lot of the versions of the story, they mention pretty consistently, that Janet is dressed in green.
Oh.
And in these stories, that symbolism, a lot of times, green is a fairy color. And so green would be very unlucky for a mortal to wear. Or green was a promise of like regrowth or renewal or rebirth. Or green was a color of promiscuity, like women who were very sexually active wore green. So the fact that she is always depicted wearing green, I'm like, oh, you're trying to cover a whole lot of interpretations here.
Can I just say I'm wearing green right now? Does that make me? I am wearing green right now. And I guess, all the things that you said, it's true. It's true.
There we go.
I'm a lady in green like Janet.
But yeah, some other imagery is, the covering of someone with your cloak. We see that motif in everything from myths and legends to religion. Covering someone with a cloak was a traditional custom symbolizing them falling under your care and protection, that you're taking responsibility for them. So, when Tamlin finally turns back into a mortal man, Janet covers him to hide him, and then she's taking responsibility for him. Ooh. And then let's focus on everybody's favorite flower, the rose. Roses are always popular in myths and legends. But in Tamlin, the woods are off limits to humans, and the roses especially are protected. Roses are, again, a fairy flower. And so by taking a rose, a forbidden flower, Janet enters the world of magic. That's kind of like her falling down the rabbit hole, going through the looking glass, walking into the wardrobe of Narnia. Mm-hmm. So she enters this world of magic. And then, of course, it's also a symbol of romance. It is a representation of her initiating the relationship with Tamlin.
Okay. I like that.
Right? And then Tamlin's series of transformations is a test of Janet's bravery, devotion, and love to him. It can also be interpreted as Janet fighting to restore Carter Hall Woods from a frightening place of magical danger to a land that is safe for mortals.
Actually, this also gives ACOTAR vibes here because Feyre, her whole point in the book was to save the realm by going through these trials. So,
yes.
And I think it's really nice too. You could even go deeper in the symbolism. In a relationship, both people turn into different things at times. We all go through certain points in our lives where we're not ourselves. We transform into these other persons, whether it be through anger, depression, sadness, and she stuck through. So we could go even deeper into that. You know what I mean?
I love that.
Yeah, I feel like that could also be a tale of just what a marriage or what a relationship is.
I love that because another interpretation of the story is that Janet is not just fighting to release Tamlin from the fairies, but she's fighting for his soul. So, we can go with, your interpretation as well of, even when in this relationship we're going through something horrible, I'm going to hold on to you to help you pass through this.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
I love it.
I love that too.
I love it. But yeah, so the story of Tamlin has been adapted into various songs, into movies, into books. It's been referenced in lots of books. In fact, the way I discovered the story of Tamlin was through Anaias Mitchell's cover of the Child Ballads. And if that name sounds familiar to you, yes, it's because she is the writer of Hadestown.
I have to watch or listen to that. I haven't seen it.
You absolutely have to. Oh, it's so good. And then, of course, we've talked on and on about Sarah J. Maas's book, pulling tons of inspiration from the original myth, like Tamlin being stolen by the fairy queen, and Tamlin in the book being imprisoned by a quote-unquote fairy queen, as well as Tamlin of the book being saved by the heroine. And, of course, Tamlin in the myth doesn't go looking for rescue like Tamlin of the book does. Rescue finds him.
Yes, it does. And then he, is a terrible person afterwards, which,
Right.
Sad.
He needs some therapy. He definitely needs some therapy. And I'm sure Tamlin of the myth needs some therapy, too. I mean, we don't know how long he was held captive by the fairies.
Oh, for sure he needs a therapist. I hope Scotland had a therapist for him.
But yeah, also, fun fact, Carter Hall is actually a real place in Scotland, and it's a tourist destination now. Sir Walter Scott, author of Ivanhoe, Rob Roy, The Bride of Lammermoor, and other works, is the one credited as being the one who placed the story of Tamlin or connected it to Carter Hall.
That's so cool.
So, yeah, there you have it. The Tamlin of Scotland.
Who actually gets the girl.
Right.
And doesn't get broke up when... he's not going to get broke up by Janet through a letter and then practically start a whole war over this. So, yeah.
Precisely. So, yeah, can you really blame me for having a soft spot for him?
I mean, I guess not.
Thank
But this is a different Tamlin. So this Tamlin I'm okay with because he's hot and he allows Janet to rescue him and they stay together.
They do. Okay. Yeah, he respects her autonomy here. Like he's developed to that point. But yeah, so listeners, what do you think? I know there are alternate versions of the story and details that I failed to mention, but this is supposed to be a fun deep dive into myths and legends and not a senior thesis.
Agreed.
If you do want to know more about the story, we will include the links to our sources when we upload this episode and a few little extra links. So, yeah.
Yeah,
that's about all I've got on Tamlin today.
No, this was so fun, and I learned a lot. Specifically some funny stuff, but it's a great story, and I think this was a good first episode to kind of let the listeners know who we are. So guys, thanks so much for joining us on Story Sirens, and we will see you next time.
Bye!
Bye! Oh, and also, if you'd like, you can definitely go ahead and follow us on Instagram or on Twitter. We'll leave our socials. And let us know what you think. Give us some comments, some ideas for the next few episodes, or something that we can bring up in the future. It would be so cool to be able to deep dive together with you for a long, long time.
We'd love that. We're all a bunch of fantasy geeks here, so let's learn about some myths.
Let's learn it!
Thanks for listening to Story Sirens. You can follow me, Yenny, on Instagram at YennyAnn, and also Sarah on Instagram at Sarah Ruth Voice. Want to support us? Buy us a cup of coffee on Ko-fi by searching ko-fi.com/storysirens. We've got lots of treats for those who become siren seekers. See you soon.